Anti-aging is a very hot topic these days, and between supplements and different things to try out, it seems like you can kind of piece together little tidbits here and there. But what does an actual entire anti-aging lifestyle look like? Well, in this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast, we have an expert guest to lead us through that. We're going to cue our introduction, and we're going to dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health Podcast, brought to you by Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and today we are exploring this idea of an anti-aging lifestyle. You know, so often we talk about the role of exercise in helping to keep us healthy and helping us to do the things that we want to do and help us to live longer, ward off chronic illness and everything like that. But what does a whole lifestyle focused around anti-aging actually look like? Well, today we have a guest expert to lead us through that. But before we get into that conversation, we have a favor to ask of you.
one of the best things that you can do to help support our podcast and get more amazing guests on, just like the one that we're going to have today, is leave us a rating and review. It only takes just a few moments, so if you wouldn't mind pausing the show now, scroll to the review area and leave us that rating and review. It helps us more than you can imagine.
So this week we are sitting down with none other than Dr. Michael Turner. Dr. Turner is a graduate of Stanford University, Harvard Medical School, and the Mayo Clinic, and has treated over 10,000 patients since 2009. He practices integrative medicine in his own national concierge practice, providing personalized approaches including hormones, sleep recovery, nutrition, supplements, and exercise to help people achieve their optimal state of health. He is also the host of the Mana podcast and has over 12,000 active subscribers to his blog on Substack. Well, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thank you, Charlie. Really glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm very excited about today's topic because I know it's one that's going to resonate a lot with our listenership. And this is the idea of anti-aging. And one of your specialties is helping your patients live an anti-aging lifestyle. So I want to start by diving in to this idea of anti-aging and like what does that actually mean? Like 10,000 foot overview, like what does anti-aging look like?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think the biggest point to convey is that a lot of things we attribute to aging and a lot of things we consider inevitable are not. They are due to, for example, lack of consistent exercise. They are due to hormonal dysfunction that never gets addressed, right? They're due to dietary habits. They're due to lack of consistent sleep. They're due to micronutrient supplement depletion, for example, magnesium or iron or vitamin D. Right. So a lot of things that we put in this bucket as inevitable and aging and a certain amount of loss of quality of life, whether muscle flexibility, muscle activation, I know that's your specialty, right? That doesn't need to happen. If you find the right practitioner and you get resolved about taking care of yourself in the right ways, you could astound yourself at how healthy and functional you can be at an older age.
Okay, this is fascinating because I think a lot of people right now are thinking, well, what do you mean it doesn't have to happen? Like the days go by. So like chronologically, you know, I'm 52 years old. Chronologically, I'm 67 years old, you know, wherever people are falling on that spectrum. But you're saying that just because your chronological age is one thing does not mean that your body has to function the way a normal or a typical 52-year-old, 67-year-old, however somebody's old is, that their body typically functions. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Oh, absolutely. Correct. Yes. There's a difference between your physiologic age and your chronologic age. In fact, there are tests that can be done. There are certain typically patented, consumer driven tests that are done that say, what is your true age? In fact, there's even a test called true age. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so they look at these markers, glucose metabolism, mitochondrial function, DNA oxidation rates, these things that are sort of next level, but they get into what's going on inside your cells, right? Not what is your birthday, but what's going on inside your cells day to day.
That's fascinating. And so I do want to get into that. Like, what are some of these markers that, we may look at as far as markers of aging? But I'm guessing where this conversation is going is like, there's something that can be done about that through our lifestyle. I mean, that's the whole idea of an anti-aging lifestyle, right? Is like, we have the opportunity to then influence these markers of aging with what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
That's fascinating. Okay, cool. So I'm really excited to dive in more. So let's get in. What are some of these markers of aging that people should be aware of?
Sure. So the first one would be glucose dysregulation. So glucose is your main blood sugar. This fuels your brain. Any carbs that you eat, carbohydrates, they all get converted ultimately down to blood sugar, which is glucose. And so one of the hallmarks of aging is increasing poor utilization of glucose. So your blood sugar levels start to slowly rise. You have a hormone called insulin whose job is to regulate blood sugar. Insulin levels start to slowly rise. You're basically needing more insulin to get the job done of organizing your blood sugar, right? This is worsened by our diet. So if you have a high carb diet or a high sugar diet, of course, you're throwing the system into worse levels of dysregulation. Ultimately, we end up with medical diagnoses like pre-diabetes, right, which we've heard of, or overt diabetes. And this all just reflects ultimately dysregulation in the system to where your blood sugar has shot up to a consistently high enough level that it's causing problems. And the problem that it ends up causing is essentially sludge in your blood vessels. Okay.
Whoa.
So glucose chemically reacts with other molecules that are floating around your bloodstream or with the lining of the blood vessel itself. And that creates, sludge, sort of a soot, to use another metaphor of like a fire. It's not clean burning. It's sooty and sludgy, essentially, if you have high levels of glucose floating around.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that's definitely something we want to make sure that we have under wraps, that, we are able to control our blood glucose levels. And clearly lifestyle is a big part of that. How much we're moving and what we're eating, everything like that. Okay. What's another kind of hallmark of the aging process?
Absolutely. Another one would be oxidative stress. This is a big concept. We've all heard of antioxidants. We all know they're helpful for us, but let's ask the question, why? Why are antioxidants helpful? What are they doing exactly? Which means we have to understand what is oxidative stress, because that's the problem the antioxidants are solving. So in a word, oxidative stress is damage that can happen to your cells from oxygen. Oxygen is a very reactive molecule. We breathe in oxygen. Obviously, it's necessary for life, but it's a double-edged sword, essentially. Okay, it's very reactive. I mean, we all know this. The right amount of oxygen next to a spark can create an explosion. Okay, so what we do is we bring in oxygen into our bodies. The ultimate destination of that is to go within our cells and go into these little parts of the cell called the mitochondria, which we probably last heard about in high school biology class. And basically, these are the so-called, power plants or energy generating centers of your cell. You have several thousand in each cell. Well, oxygen gets in there, and essentially your body is taking a molecule of sugar or a molecule of fat, and you are burning it in the presence of oxygen. I want you to think of like a wood burning stove, and you're throwing your molecule of fat or your molecule of carb into the stove. You're closing the door. That's your mitochondria. It's a contained space. And then you bring in enough oxygen and you have a fire that breaks out. And then you try to capture heat and energy from that fire. That's all good, other than it's not a perfectly clean, neat, packaged, safe process, right? So oxygen's down in there, and it doesn't always combine perfectly with those molecules of carbs, those molecules of fat. Now I want you to think about sparks flying out. I want you to think about smoke pouring out of this stove, right? So as if your mitochondria cease to use oxygen in a perfectly efficient way, and nobody's do, by the way, then you end up sort of with the oxygen tearing up parts of the mitochondria itself. So you get some internal degradation of that wood burning stove enclosed space. You get some breakdown, you get sparks leaking out, you get energy loss. There's a loss of efficiency, right? So this has to do with mitochondrial health, and this has to do with oxidative stress. That's mainly where the oxidative stress is happening in your body. It's oxygen reacting with molecules that it shouldn't and degrading them. A simple example is rust. Okay, if a piece of metal rusts outside, that's oxidative stress. It's oxygen from the atmosphere combining with the metal, tearing up its structure. Another example is if you cut an apple and leave it out in the kitchen and it turns brown. What happened? That's oxidative stress. Oxygen from the atmosphere reacting with the surface of that apple, tearing it up. So you can imagine we don't want a lot of rusting concept happening inside our body. That is oxidative stress. The flip, and lifestyle has a huge bearing on that too. I don't know how much you want to go into it, but an obvious example would be smoking. Okay, smoking, terrible source of oxidative stress for your body, right? Drinking excessively also. So there are other common drivers, but the flip side of that is antioxidants. You can think of antioxidants like fire extinguishers. Okay. So you have this fiery process, and it's sparking, and it's got some smoke pouring out, and it's sometimes, little embers are getting loose, but antioxidants are sitting there as little fire extinguishers, dousing that fire in every spot that it doesn't belong. Okay. And trying to keep it contained right within the safe confines biochemically of the interior of the mitochondria.
I love it. That's super important and super, super fascinating. Okay, cool. So we have glucose dysregulation, we have oxidative stress, we have mitochondrial health. Are there any other kind of like hallmarks or markers of the aging process? We're not talking about like gray hairs or wrinkles, but like within our cells.
Sure. I'll mention two other ones that are
Cool.
notable and important, right? So the next one would be inflammation. So chronic inflammation is a very negative concept. Short-term inflammation is okay. We all understand that. If you sprain your ankle, it's going to be inflamed. There needs to be a healing process that happens. That's all fine. But chronic inflammation is a very negative concept. It drives, for example, cancer. It drives heart attacks and strokes. It drives certain kinds of dementia. So chronic inflammation, and again, I would say the picture of inflammation to think about would be a splinter. Okay. If you have a splinter in your hand, that redness, that swelling, that's inflammation. Your immune system is activated against a foreign body. It's recruiting certain immune cells, and you're actively trying to dissolve, essentially, and attack this thing that's foreign and eradicate it from your body. Well, you can imagine you don't want that process happening inside the arteries of your heart, for example, right? You don't want anything foreign getting in there and attracting an immune response and creating localized swelling and inflammation, in prime real estate, like your coronary arteries or like the nerves of your brain, right? As examples. So we want to eliminate any sources of chronic inflammation. Some examples would be, let's say, a dental problem that you never really got dealt with. Okay. Chronic cavity that's just sitting there. That's a smoldering infection, right? Your body is sort of just trying to slowly react against this, but it's really not winning the battle. And it's just this stasis, and it's just back and forth between the nasty little infection that's not getting resolved in your body's inflammatory response to do so. Or another example would be colon problems or GI problems like diverticulosis, if you've heard of that, right? You've got some irritation in your GI lining. There's a smoldering infection that's down there. Your body's trying to eradicate it, but you keep making it worse by what you're eating, et cetera. So certain signs of chronic inflammation like that, or, on the lifestyle side, sugar, for example, sugar intake drives inflammation. Sugar is pro-inflammatory. This is really interesting. I would have patients come to me and say, yeah, Dr. Turner, whenever I eat sugar, my back pain just gets worse. My back starts hurting, or my hip, And I at first I thought they're a little odd, in saying that. I mean, I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I'm thinking, all right, I believe you. Okay, that's interesting though. I mean, you eat sugar and your back hurts. I mean, come on. But I heard about it enough times, and then when I understood that sugar's pro-inflammatory, it makes some sense. So
fascinating.
Yeah. So the flip side of that is we need to do things that are anti-inflammatory in terms of our lifestyle. So, I mean, there's even a search phrase you can look up called anti-inflammatory diet, right? That's a concept. You can look that up on Google. There are principles of eating that are so-called anti-inflammatory diet. I'm a big fan of supplements. So there are some powerful natural supplements that are anti-inflammatory. And for example, because they reduce inflammation, they're very good for arthritis. Okay, arthritis has an inflammatory aspect to it. So a couple of my top favorites are fish oil or omega-3 fatty acids, usually about 3,000 milligrams a day, outstanding. As an example, I've had many patients come in with stiff hands in the beginning of arthritis in their joints, and they'll say, oh, Dr. Turner, my mom or my dad got these stiff fingers as they got older. I really don't want that to happen. I can tell it's starting to happen. The first thing I do is say, fish oil, 3,000 milligrams a day of omega-3s. Watch what happens. In 3 weeks, their hand starts feeling better. But another one would be, for example, turmeric or curcumin. You've heard about that. Probably it's gotten a lot of press over the last year or so. It's a root that comes out of India. And so typically used in yellow curry. It's that yellow root that's ground up and used in curry. And it's called turmeric. And it's also therefore a spice. The medically active ingredient, the most potent subset of that root, is the curcumin molecule. And so that's really helpful as well, strong anti-inflammatory properties. So that's inflammation. And the last one I'll mention here would be sleep. So one of the hallmarks of aging is disrupted sleep. When you're young, And let's think back all the way to childhood, right? You fall asleep, you sleep like a log. I mean, nothing wakes you up, and then you don't get up for 9 hours or something, right? And then you refresh, you got energy to get going during the next day, right? And then somewhere along the way, that just starts to slip, and then we just become accustomed to it, right? We're like,
Sure.
And so I'll ask patients, well, tell me about your sleep. Well, it's all right. Okay. How many times do you get up at night? Oh, 2-3 times. Okay. Are you you're fully awake and you get out of bed, 2-3 times and go do something like, use the restroom or have a snack or feed the dog or something? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's not healthy. I don't know what to tell you. That's not great.
Yeah.
So there's something called slow wave sleep or deep sleep or stage 4 sleep that your audience can look into. This is the most restorative stage of sleep. Okay. It's extremely important. It's not REM sleep. You're not dreaming. You're knocked out. You're just completely unconscious. You have no memory and no recollection of this. That's stage 4 sleep, and that's your deepest, most restorative sleep. And unfortunately, stage 4 sleep amounts drop off consistently as you get older. They get choppier and choppier. That holds a whole lot of negative effects. For example, lack of sleep drives inflammation. Obviously, lack of sleep drives your energy level, both mentally and physically. The next day, that drops off. Choppy sleep ends up interfering with hormones. And so your testosterone levels will fall, your growth hormone levels will fall, your insulin levels will rise. Choppy sleep has a strong role with Alzheimer's, for example. There's a big connection there because it's in that deepest stage of sleep that your brain essentially is undergoing a self-cleansing process. Think of it like a dishwasher or something where it's on the self-cleanse cycle, right? You hit this button. That's what's going on in your body at night through something called the glymphatic system. But basically, your brain is washing through, removing some of the metabolic waste products that are involved in Alzheimer's. If you don't have deep sleep, you don't have much of that cleansing process happening, and you therefore have buildup of some of these products associated and causal for Alzheimer's disease.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, so let me just recap these 5 that we covered. Glucose dysregulation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial health, inflammation, specifically chronic inflammation, and then sleep disruption, not getting to that stage 4 sleep, that deep sleep. So one, I guess my first question is, are there different tests or labs or whatever that people could do to kind of check in to see how these different things are? Or would going the direction of just kind of trying to figure out your physiological age or biological age kind of be the best step for a lot of people?
A good first step would be some labs that your primary care doc can check, or an anti-aging specialist like myself or somebody else. Yeah, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to do a fancy lab test as an initial step. So I'll just give you a couple examples. Inflammation, that can be checked very easily. There's a test called CRP. It stands for C-reactive protein. There's even a high-sensitivity CRP test that can be done. There's a similar test called ESR, which stands for erythrocyte sedimentation rate, but you don't have to remember that. Just think ESR. So ESR and CRP are markers of inflammation, as an example.
Okay.
Markers of blood sugar dysregulation, absolutely. So you should get a fasting glucose. You should also get a fasting insulin level. And then you're going to get something called hemoglobin A1C. That helps you understand your 90-day average of glucose, for example.
Cool.
Yeah. Those
Awesome.
are good. Yeah, those are a couple good places to start. Measuring sleep dysfunction can also be done increasingly easily at home. There are home sleep devices, wearable technology, Apple Watches, different sorts of things that tell you how much deep sleep you're getting every night. So actually, you can monitor that and track it.
That's awesome. And then is there any way to measure kind of like oxidative stress levels or health of mitochondria, or is that not as easily accessible to your knowledge?
Great question. Not as easily accessible. A little bit on the oxidative stress side. So there are some urinary markers. There's something called, I think it's 8-OHDG, but it's a urinary marker of oxidative stress.
Okay.
So that's a little harder. That's a little more far field. And then measuring mitochondrial function is difficult. It'd be great if it were easy. It's really not quite so much. But there are some specialty tests that are done so-called urinary organic acid tests that can be done. These would be send out labs from some certain proprietary companies, but
Sure.
can be looked into, but a little harder.
Okay, but it seems like, hey, there are some very straightforward ones that can be done as far as like the CRP, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and then just being able to kind of like track your sleep. Like I know I use my phone to track my sleep. You know, there are different wearable devices you can use to track your sleep. And so that technology is very consumer friendly in that regard.
True, absolutely. And just
Awesome.
on the side of testing as well towards anti-aging, I would mention two things that are very, very important. One would be a coronary artery CT scan, and then a so-called NMR lipoprotein profile. Both of these have to do with cardiovascular health. And that is the most important anti-aging concept. How healthy is my cardiovascular system? Not how healthy is my brain or my kidneys or my liver, although those are all vitally important, but how healthy is my cardiovascular system? Because your cardiovascular system is responsible for 2 out of the top 3 causes of death. First of all, heart attacks and strokes. Number 2, blood flow is the foundation and the basis for the function of any other organ system in your body. So if you have poor blood flow, you will therefore have poor brain function. It's just simply not getting enough blood flow, right? Or poor kidney function, liver, etc., poor exercise capacity. So everything depends on an adequate amount of blood flow as its foundation. So thus, cardiovascular health is the most important anti-aging concept, I would say.
Awesome.
And to assess that well, you should get an NMR lipoprotein profile. This is basically a more in-depth, more nuanced version of a cholesterol test. Your simple, typical cholesterol, this goes into more depth. Coronary artery CT scan can measure any degree of hardening of the arteries, aka atherosclerosis, in the arteries of your heart. Very, very helpful. That can be imaged and quantified.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about from a lifestyle perspective. We knocked out like, okay, what are the common markers of aging, but what can we do from a lifestyle perspective to live this anti-aging lifestyle and start to combat these things?
Great. Well, the first one is something that everybody knows. Not everyone does successfully, but if I had to say there's just one thing that you need to do from an anti-aging perspective, it's consistent exercise. This is the number one thing because it drives so many other anti-aging processes. For example, consistent exercise, obviously your cardiovascular system is getting in shape, right? Your heart's beating, your blood vessels are dilating because you have to dissipate heat and because your muscles need more energy. So there we go, cardiovascular system. Consistent exercise, you're lowering your blood sugar, right? You're training the mitochondria of your cells to burn blood sugar more efficiently, and you're actually inducing greater numbers of mitochondria. So that's one thing patients don't always understand. If I ask the question, how many mitochondria are in each cell? The answer is, it depends. If you've been sitting around on the couch watching a lot of Netflix, the cells will downshift and start lowering the number of mitochondria that they have because they're not getting any message that they need to burn energy. So they're going to be efficient and recycle that. On the other hand, if you've been on the Stairmaster every day or doing Zumba class for 30 minutes a day, right? The number of mitochondria in your cells will double, triple, because the cells are getting the message. So exercise directly stimulates mitochondrial function, lowers blood sugar. As an example, that's the single. And by the way, exercise also improves the quality of your sleep. We know that if you exercise hard during that day, you sleep more soundly at night. So it hits on, multiple outputs there.
I love that. First of all, that was not something that we primed Dr. Turner to say. That was like his true opinion that consistent exercise is the number one thing that you can do from an anti-aging lifestyle perspective. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's music to my ears.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Well, sure. Yeah, and absolutely. That just came right off of my top of my head and from my heart.
I love that.
Absolutely, Charlie.
I love that.
So I'll mention one thing that would help people. Let's talk a little bit there about how do we get going on this exercise that we know we should do, want to do, et cetera, right? There are always barriers that we've got, and we've got to address those and help people sort of move through those to get where they want to be, right? So people will come in and I'll say something like, well, tell me about your exercise program. Well, I don't really do too much right now, and I'm like, well, why not? Well, and then there's certain fill in the blank, answers that come out, right? And so we have to help people sort of move past that. But one of the first things I would say, my first rule, I have 2 rules of exercise. My first one is it needs to feel fun. This is the most important rule. It needs to feel fun. Why? Because if it doesn't feel fun, then you're just operating out of willpower and you will quickly be done with that. That will only take you so far, right? That's all the people who sign up for the gym in January and they're gone by April. Okay. That's people who really don't like to be in the gym, but they're doing it because they're supposed to do it or because their spouse nagged them. And then at some point they're like, you know what, forget this. You know what? Life's too short to do something you don't like. And you know what? They're right. So the first thing that needs to happen is exercise needs to feel fun. I want you to think of recess. Okay. When you were a kid, right? Recess was fun. The teacher didn't say, hey, Johnny, hey, Susie, make sure you run around, burn some energy, go play tag, right? Remember, do something, remember, right? It's like, hey, doors are open, bell rings, you're split out of there like a jackrabbit.
Oh, yeah.
You're running, having a good time. Exactly. So when I talk about exercise with my clients, I say it needs to feel like adult recess.
I love that.
That's the feeling. That's the excitement. That's the enthusiasm. That's the subconscious mind frame that you need to be in. It's like adult recess. It's like, hey, I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to go into the gym today. And it's like, I don't have to do anything. I get to do something. What do I want to do? I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not thinking about answering emails. None of that. This is just me having fun, moving through three-dimensional space with my body, just like I used to do when I was a kid. This is adult recess. That's the first rule. And because there are so many options to exercise, there's something that's fun for everybody. Some people don't like a gym. All right, I get it. Go walk the dog. Go put on a 20-pound weighted vest and walk the dog. Go put on a 20-pound weighted vest and a little oxygen deprivation mask and walk the dog. You'll be sweating hard and no problem. You go out in the backyard and do some yoga poses, right? Go out in the backyard and do some calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks. Do a Zumba class, do a country line dancing class, do a step aerobics class. Maybe you like a spin class. Like there's infinite variety. Maybe you want to go lap swimming. Maybe you want to swim in the river near your house, right? I mean, it goes on and on. So you just got to get in touch with yourself and find that thing that feels fun. That's the first rule to get going. And the second rule I would say would be you need to start small and be very patient with yourself. And you need to deal effectively with setbacks because setbacks will always happen, right? There's going to be that week where you wanted to go work out 4 days and then life hits you and you didn't get there at all. You got 0 days. So the answer is when that following week starts, what's your mindset, right? Do you have the mindset of, oh, I was supposed to be there 4 times last week. I didn't really go at all. Dang it, I'm a schmuck. Here I go again with my bad habits. This is just too hard. I'll never be successful at this, whatever. And then you quit, right? Or do you have a more resilient and positive and more encouraging and less self-condemning concept, which is like, hey, you know what? It was what it was, but today's a new day. Today's the first day of the rest of my life. Okay. I might have had, 3, Cokes and 5 donuts and skipped gym yesterday, but you know what? Today's a new day. So I don't need to carry around the guilt and the hangups. Like fresh day, fresh opportunity. Let's just see what happens. So you got to become resilient. Any step of behavior change is 2 or 3 steps forward and 1 step back. And the answer is actually, how do you respond when you have your 1 backward step? Because it's inevitable, right? You got to pick yourself up and you got to say, frankly, it's not over till you say it's over, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you had 4 weeks in a row, 5 weeks, 5 years, you being healthy, it's not over till you say it's over. If you lay down and quit, then you're right. You're done. You're not healthy at that point. If you pick yourself up, then today's a new day.
Yes, sir. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So in addition to exercising consistently, are there other things that people should be looking to add in or remove from their lifestyle?
Sure. I would say the next most important one would probably be a low carb / low sugar dietary concept. Very, very important.
Nice. And that would seem to help with any kind of glucose dysregulation, as well as you're talking about the inflammation, possibly helping with that as well.
Correct. Yes.
Right on.
It does.
All right. Fantastic. Cool. So we got movement. We got, what we're eating. How can people go about thinking about their sleep? Because, sleep dysregulation is a big one. Is there things that people should be doing in that regard?
Yes, absolutely. A couple things. The first one is the sleep environment. So I want you to think of a tomb. Okay. A tomb is cold and dark and quiet. That is your optimal sleep environment. Okay. Optimal sleep temp is a little cool. It's about 66 degrees scientifically when they study this. So it needs to be just a little bit of chilly where you kind of need to pull the blanket up. Okay. Cold, dark, super important. I use blackout shades or I use an eye mask every single night. I don't fail. Okay. The darker it is, the more deeply you will sleep. And that's because light is an alerting stimulus to your brain. Even when your eyes are closed, even when your eyelid is closed, light can still enter. I mean, you know that. For example, right now it's light outside, close your eyes. There's still a little orange hue that's coming through your eyelid, right? So that little bit of light is still going right through the eyelid, right through your pupil, right to your brain. What happens when light hits your brain? It lights it up and makes you feel alert. Okay, so if there are low levels of light all night, your brain's getting a low level alerting stimulus all night, and it's not going deeply into rest.
Okay.
Similarly, sound. If there's noise, your brain is processing that subconsciously, and it's trying to figure out friend or foe. Do I need to wake Johnny up? Is this someone breaking into the house? Is this just the dog doing his thing? What's going on, right? So now your brain is distracted and it's processing this auditory information. You need quiet, right? Then your brain will go to deeper levels of rest. So creating that right lifestyle environment is important. I would say another thing would be forward shifting your hours of sleep. So for example, 6 hours of sleep, if you were to wait till 1 a.m. to go to bed because you like to stay up late and watch late night TV, and you sleep till 7, that is not the same as going to bed at 10, let's just say, and sleeping even till 4 a.m. Okay. So 6 hours does not equal 6 hours. It depends on when you're getting it, as an example. And not that 6 hours is even a great amount of sleep, right? I want you to aim for more of an 8 or so, but you want to front load that. So it's better to go to bed earlier and get up earlier than stay up late and sleep in. Okay. Physiologically, that's more in tune with your body. The third thing I would say is you need to eliminate any reasons for getting up in the middle of the night, right? You need to go to sleep. Quality sleep is you go to sleep, and the next thing that happens is you wake up with your alarm, or even better yet, just naturally. Okay. 0 times going to the bathroom, 0 times waking up and feeding the dog, 0 times, all this other stuff. Right. Now, it's sometimes difficult to get there, but it can be done. There are medications, for example, that can help dry out your bladder so you don't have to get up and use the restroom, for men or women. It's something I deal with all the time, help people. There's eliminating some of the distractions at night, et cetera, but you want to keep pushing to where you're actually getting uninterrupted sleep. The last thing I'll say is sometimes people have trouble falling asleep because their mind's racing. So then I talk about the concept of a restful bedtime ritual, quote unquote, right? And again, we'll harken back to childhood. If you had a nice, comfy, cozy childhood, then there was typically some sort of restful bedtime ritual that would happen, right? Mom's like, okay, Charlie, you go lay down and I'll come in a minute and, I'll read you a story, or maybe you're reading yourself a story, maybe your dog jumps up on your bed, and the mom's coming in, she's tucking you in, and all that. So there's this whole process and ritual. And if you have kids as well, you understand you can't just put them in the playpen and say, fall asleep, right?
Right.
You got to ease them into it. You got to kill the lights and all this stuff. So same thing. As adults, a lot of times we need to establish a resting bedtime ritual if we have trouble falling asleep, right? Some of us are sitting there, we're doing things that are emotionally agitating right before bed, right? We're watching news, right? That's terrible. We're on our phone or something, we're trying to do bills, we're worried about life. And then we flick the light off and think we're going to fall asleep right away. Right. So we have to set the stage, right? So you have to do something like, read a book for pleasure, with a low light, little book light on it, right? Because again, light is an alerting stimulus. Or soak your feet, or journal, right? Or read your Bible, or pray, or just pet your dog. Something that's easing you into that transition mentally. Super helpful if people have trouble falling asleep.
I love that. That's fantastic. That is just such great information. Dr. Turner, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Sure. So 2 places. My blog, I have a lot of wellness articles that come out, as well as my own podcast, and that is drturner.substack.com. So drturner.substack.com. That's a great way for people to get a hold of my different resources, whether, articles or podcasts. The other thing, if people want to work with me directly, that would be michaelturnermd.com.
Awesome.
And I work remotely. I do telemedicine actually all over the country. I have clients all the way from Maine to Hawaii and all parts in between. So
nice.
Work remote and do telemedicine. It's been a blessing. I really enjoy it.
That's awesome. Good for you. Dr. Turner, the question that we like wrapping up with for all of our guests is, what is your definition of health?
I would say it's being the best possible version of yourself in many key dimensions: physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, let's say, to put 4 categories on it. So that's what it is. It's about optimization. It's not just about absence of disease, and it's multidimensional, and it's not comparative. It's not comparing to anybody else, right? I can't be as strong as this person, or I can't be in shape as that person. It's like, that doesn't matter. I just need to be the healthiest possible version of myself, optimized in those key areas. That's what I would say.
That's fantastic. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise with us today. This was just a fascinating conversation and so applicable to every single person. The action steps, the information, it's all there. Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks, Charlie. I enjoyed it very much.
You bet.
All right, that was a fun interview, right? I mean, the information that Dr. Turner was giving was so clear-cut, so concise, so applicable to all of our lives. I mean, there are definitely things that I know you can take and start immediately implementing in what you're doing every single day. Well, hey, if you want to learn more about Dr. Turner, if you want to connect with him, if you want to get in with his practice, definitely check out his website as well as all of his content on Substack and on his social profiles. We'll put the links to all of that in the show notes below.
And we wanted to let you know that we have opened up our Exercise for Life membership totally for free for 2 weeks, and we want you to try it out. So many of our listeners listen to this podcast and they want to try out what we're talking about. They want to try out, how do I exercise with no joint pain? How do I exercise even if I have a quote unquote bad back? All those types of things are things that we help you with. So we want you to try out our free membership by going to www.exerciseforlifestudios.com, and you can claim your free 2-week membership there.
So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is interested in starting to implement more anti-aging tactics within their life, but they really don't know where to get started? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of information and a lot of strategies out there. Share this episode with them so they can really hone in on these simple things that they can start doing today to get those anti-aging effects. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Cates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.